talk about three things. First, I'd like to update on Wednesday's police officer involved shooting. Then provide information about last night's protest in the Central West End. And end by talking about the department's preparations for this weekend. So, in my time as chief in the past 2 years, I have pledged to investigate police officer involved shooting in an open and transparent manner. To do that, in accordance with department policies, we formed the 4th Investigative Unit in 2014. Anytime an officer uses deadly force and someone is injured or dies, I believe it demands the highest level of scrutiny and is subject to a criminal investigation. Wednesday's incident is currently being investigated by our 4th Investigative Unit and is being investigated as a criminal incident. As this incident has progressed in just a few short days, new facts have come to light. We now have the preliminary autopsy results from the St. Louis Medical Examiner's Office that have indicated that Mr. Ball-Bey sustained one single gunshot wound, a fatal gunshot wound to his back. We also have interviewed witnesses that live in the neighborhood who saw the incident. In addition, we're in the process of completing DNA and fingerprint analysis of the firearms that were recovered at the scene. And if you remember, we talked about 4 guns being recovered at the scene, 3 of which had been previously reported stolen. As we reported at the scene that day, there was a 4th individual who was in the house who ran out the back door with Mr. Ball-Bey and fled from the scene. I'm sending out a plea to the community, to that man's family, to that young man, to come forward, tell us his story. Because without his story, we will not have a complete set of facts that occurred that morning in that backyard. The 2 officers who were involved in the shooting have been interviewed or are being interviewed by our 4th Investigative Unit along with their attorneys. The medical examiner's findings do not change the scope of the investigation. It started as a criminal investigation, and it continues as a criminal investigation. We have more information today than we did yesterday, but we're still in the early stages of the investigation. And the new facts by themselves do not paint the complete picture. The investigation is not complete until we get all of the facts and analyze all of the physical evidence and interview all of the witnesses involved. Once our investigation is complete, as is our policy, that investigation will be handed off to Jennifer Joyce, the Circuit Attorney for the City of St. Louis, and she will conduct her own independent review of the facts of the case, interview witnesses, and examine the physical evidence. Her investigation is completely independent. Her review is completely independent of the Metropolitan Police Department. As an added step, when our investigation is complete, we will also provide a copy to the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Missouri, Richard Callahan, and I've talked to him in his office additionally to review the investigation. I don't want to speculate on the outcome. The facts are the facts. It's more important now than ever that the facts be exposed properly. And as they are, one thing that we need to know is exactly what happened in that backyard. We cannot speculate. We must look at the facts. We must interview the witnesses. We must let the physical evidence lead us to our conclusion. The public's trust in their police department has to be the #1 priority in our community. And our 4th Investigative Unit and the way that we look at officer-involved shootings is modeled after departments around the country and is the best practice. As we move on to the incidents that occurred last night, again, we had protests in the city of St. Louis. We had protests that started in the area of Page and Walton. And what started out as a small gathering of 50 and 60, and then over 100, and somewhere between 150 and 200 people. That group marched from Walton and Page last night to the Central West End. It's a 10-minute march or so, 15-minute march. When the group reached the Central West End at the intersection of Maryland and Euclid, they blocked the intersection. They blocked traffic in all 4 directions for about 30 to 40 minutes. Police officers were in the area. Traffic was stopped, but no arrests were made. No chemical munitions were deployed. The group was allowed to stand in the street. As the group of their own fruition began to march again, they marched north on Euclid from Maryland. As they were doing that, some individuals in the group, a handful of individuals in the group, decided that destruction of property was a good idea. They jumped on the roofs of cars, they jumped on the hoods of cars, they kicked cars. And as police officers began to respond to the area, they ran and scattered. As the group continued to move north on Euclid, they encountered two individuals, an older woman from the city of St. Louis and a resident of the Central West End. Those two individuals were assaulted by the group as they moved past them. The gentleman sustained a punch to the face, breaking his glasses, knocking him to the ground, and a scrape to his face. The older woman, while shaken up, did not sustain any injury. That shows what we talked about many times in protests. Well, protesters come together to have a voice, to have their voices heard, and which is our job to protect, and which our job to do, to keep their voices heard. There are some in the group that take advantage of that opportunity, and we saw that last night with the destruction of property and the assaulting of two people simply standing on the sidewalk in the Central West End. So moving forward, for the weekend. Yesterday, Mayor Slay and I, along with the Clergy Coalition, met at the Westside Missionary Baptist Church and called for peace and calm in our community. Many people in our community heard that call last night, but not all. So in preparation for that, the Metropolitan Police Department has gone to 12-hour days and canceled days off. So there are no officers on recreation days for the Metropolitan Police Department, and we started 12-hour shifts. Not because I want to respond to something, but because I want to keep the peace. Because I want to have officers available to be in the Central West End, to be on Grand Avenue, to be downtown, to be visible, to protect the rights of those that come together lawfully, but also to take action when criminals use those groups for their activities. The department stands ready and will stand ready all weekend. The mayor and I just met with Governor Nixon and the superintendent of the Highway Patrol. Governor Nixon has pledged any support, as well as the Highway Patrol of the city of St. Louis. But to be clear, we have not asked for any assistance from the Highway Patrol. The Highway Patrol is not responding to the city of St. Louis at this time, but should we have a request, should we have a need, they're willing to do so. So, in closing, I want to be clear that in every aspect of what we do in the Metropolitan Police Department, I want to be open and transparent. From the creation of the Force Investigative Unit, to the sharing of the autopsy results, which are now just 24 hours old, to giving an update on the status of the statements from the officers. We will continue to share as much information as we can, as quickly as we can, knowing that at the conclusion of the investigation, the entire investigative report that is allowed to be opened by the sunshine law in the state will be available to anybody that wants to read it. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
How do you reconcile a subject being shot in the back and justifiable?
So I have never used the word justifiable in this case. So what I want to say is that that's why we do investigations. The questions that have to be answered are, where was the subject standing? Where were the officers standing? Were they running? Were they stopped? What was the angle? So there are many questions, so I cannot speculate. Part of our investigation, part of the interviews that have to happen with the officers are that. That's why I put out the plea for the young man who ran from the scene to come forward to tell his story. We do have witnesses, any witness in the area, who has told us what they saw. But again, each fact gives us a bigger picture, but no one fact by itself tells a complete story.
Does that witness corroborate that the young man had a gun?
The witness corroborates that the young man had a gun.
Chief, the family's attorney talked to us today and claimed that this young man was actually 2 doors down to the south of the house when the search warrant was executed and was unarmed.
So,
do you stand by the fact that he was still armed and at that house?
what I stand by is I have a witness statement that says that there was a gun involved, and I have officer statements that say there was a gun involved. You weren't there, and I wasn't there. So what we have to do is rely on those. So what I am able to report to you and tell you is the information that I have now. So to answer the first part of your question, he ran out the back door, jumped the fence, and was headed south. So that part of the statement, I have seen physical evidence that makes me believe that to be true.
That's not cheap. They have pretty good. That pointed at that turn, pointed at that job. Is that still checking out that he had a gun or pointed at that job?
I believe that part of the statement is still be true, yes.
How many witnesses do you have that?
I'm aware of one witness right now. You've got the officer statements, and again, this young man, we believe is 14 years old, a young teenager, needs to come forward and help provide the information that he can about the incidents that occurred that day.
Were the officers wearing plain clothes or were they wearing uniforms?
They were plainclothes officers that have vests that say police on the phone.
Chief, you mentioned that they have attorneys, and you've spoken to their attorneys. And what can you tell us about those two officers involved with the shooting?
About 7 years on each. About 7 years, late 20s, early 30s in age. I can get more information. It's probably not my head.
Have they come on your radar before with anything like this?
I'm familiar with the names, but I'm not familiar with the officers independently or specifically.
Have they ever been disciplined for anything?
I'll have to look at their discipline records.
You don't know yet if they have that?
I don't know. I don't have the records in front of me.
I mean, you're saying you haven't asked just to see what the background is of these cops?
There's information. There's information that is, as a personnel file, releasable, and there's information that's not.
Right.
I don't know what is in that file that's released.
Is there anything that you know about these officers that is particularly troubling in relation to this case and any others in the past that you could share with us at this point?
I have not seen anything in their disciplinary history that caused me pause. They're police officers. They do police work. That's what they do.
Could the witness say that the young man ran out of the house? Would the witness say that he saw them when they got out?
And I don't want to get into too many specifics of that because we still have an investigation to do. But the witness says that he saw a gun being tossed.
Chief, one of the things I've noticed when there's police involved shooting over the last year, and when the police say initially that the suspect had a gun, there's a large, or maybe a large minority of people just frankly don't believe the police, and that is evidently not their fires happening here. I mean, how is your department facing that reality, and that what you tell people, and what you tell the community is police?
Well, and that's a great question because that's something that we struggle with every day. So, if you're talking about Von Myers, we struggle with that case. So, initial statements on the scene where the young man was armed with a gun. The investigation conducted by the police department with forensic and ballistic evidence pointed to that. The circuit attorney's independent investigation pointed to that. And so, 2 independent investigations pointed to facts. We know what we know now. We're in an effort to gain more facts. I know it's difficult to believe, and I know that any time violence, whether it's community member or law enforcement involved, is difficult. And there are always lots of questions. What I urge is the community doesn't rush to conclusions, that they allow the facts to come forward. And that's why we go very slowly, very methodically, to make sure that we don't miss anything and we can paint a true and accurate picture. That's my goal. There is no benefit to not putting out the complete truth. What the community has to understand is that the truth takes time to put together. That you may have a piece of it, I may have a piece of it, the young man that we would like to interview has a piece of it. And until those are all brought together, it's an incomplete story.
Judith, have you seen the DNA of fingerprint evidence for weapons that were recovered?
So DNA, I always enjoy this question. It's not CSI on CP, and so DNA takes a considerable amount of time to come back for the results, and the fingerprints are being examined now as we speak. So can I tell you that those are those young man's prints yet? No, I cannot. Can I tell you that they're his DNA? No, I cannot. In a couple of days, a couple of weeks, I will be able to tell you yes, they are, or no, they're not.
How far away was the young man from the officer?
So, and that's part of the investigation, and because the officers have statements, I have not heard their statements yet. I would be speculative on my part to say that.
You just said that there's no benefit to not telling the truth, but a lot of people assume that you're just talking out your own to the officers, and that's the benefit that comes to you. So how do you change that perception?
Well, I think that you have to look at history. And so just this year, we started an investigation into one of our own that ultimately led to being federally charged. We have fired, our officers have resigned over 24 times since I've been chief because of behaviors that we don't want in our department and behaviors that we've called out. So while I think if you look at any single event by itself, you have to look at the totality. And just as I said, the CSI effect, St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department is different from any other police department as they are different from us. And you have to gauge us on our actions and our responses and not the reactions and responses of other agencies. So to come back to that, we've referred people to prosecution, both at the state and federal level. We have fired officers and forced officers to retire and resign that were not good cops. Just like there aren't good reporters, there aren't good doctors, there are good cops sometimes.
Explain, I know it's allowed in law, you can't shoot somebody in the neck. Explain how that damage took us very quickly. What goes through officers' minds in this situation?
So I think Dr. David Klinger from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, who was quoted in a Closer Smash story today, really kind of summed it up, that an officer, based on a Supreme Court decision, an officer believes there's a perceived threat is allowed to use deadly force. Our policy in the Metropolitan Police Department is that an officer reasonably believes if his life or someone else's life is in jeopardy, or fear of being harmed, that they can use deadly force. These are instantaneous decisions that happen in dynamic, fluid environments with bodies in motion. And while it's easy to stand here and say someone was shot in the back, oh, I get it. It's another thing jumping a fence, running through the yard, turning, twisting, pointing a gun. So I don't want to jump to conclusions. What I want to do is report the facts as we know them now. And in a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, I can come back with more information and tell you. But Dr. Klinger at Elmsall is probably the best person to talk about that. He's done a considerable amount of research on police officers.
Just a follow-up question. How many somebody
You asked me hypothetically. We were talking about a hypothetical. We were talking about this case. So in a case, there could be 2 officers. A gun is displayed. 2 officers are at different angles. A variety of scenarios, but we're not talking about this case. That's a question.
With this case, Chief, you mentioned the one witness outside that saw this. What about the other police officers? There's a number of them that came to this house. Besides the 2 that are involved in this case, have any of those police officers given statements? What have they said?
They are everybody that's involved is required to participate in the investigation and give statements. And they're part of the investigation. The investigation happened in the rear of the house, and as I'm aware of right now, only 2 officers were in the rear of the house.
Well,
The 2 officers involved in this shooting are the only police witnesses that we have.
and they weren't using body cameras, why not?
That's the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department has about 100 in-car cameras. We are in the process of examining a body camera program. We don't have a body camera program yet.
The medical report saying this shot was dropped. The report says the man shot.
I'm not a doctor, and so I have not seen that part of the report. But you have to ask the medical examiner or a medical professional.
Where was the gun?
Starting in the house, through the backyard, and into the attic.
And when the warrant was executed, with the police in the back,
These 2 officers. Correct.
how many other officers actually responded to the search?
We had a tactical team respond.
So like 12?
So, and that's a tactical one.
Okay. I got you.
Was Mr. Ball-Bey wearing, like, his FedEx uniform when he died?
I've heard that many times, and I asked that question specifically. He was not wearing a FedEx uniform, to my knowledge.
So it wasn't like coming back from work with his talk with his hand. It seemed like that kind of seemed like, you know, he was busy about was also on programs or something like that. Is that true?
I get to hear answer. I was looking for a question here.
Well, do you have any idea why he was there?
That'll be part of our investigation. I don't know.